Hello. Our story begins with war. Terrible war. On the galactic stage, with the all-powerful Republic, war was an imaginative concept. On the local level, that varied greatly. Systems could choose to declare war and invade other planets, especially if protections from the galactic government were not present. The Republic cared about its profit and its peace. That's about it. If both were met, then the bare minimum could be exerted, which had been the case inside the government for centuries by this point. Outside the core, inner, and mid-rims existed a plane of chaos that Republic citizens willingly overlooked. There was no real galactic military, nor a need or a want for actual conflict. If someone suffered and it wasn't inside their territory as a government, then it wasn't their problem. Hell, even if violence erupted on a Republic system, the actual government likely wouldn't protect it. Bureaucracy ruled the land. Nothing changed that. Whether it be Togrutan Chancellor Qymaen or Coruscant Chancellor Finis Valorum, the result always ended up being the same. Hollow campaign promises to outer and mid-rim worlds facing the oppression of criminal organizations and continued hyper-focus on the people that already had it good enough. That brings all of this to the planet of Kalee, at the top of the galactic map, just a little west of the powerful banking world of Molinist. A technology-advanced bug species known as the Yamri had been besieging minor planets around this territory of space. Of course, the people known by the locals as the Huck never targeted Republic systems, but if you didn't have the protection of the galactic government, then you were easy pickings. The Yamri made an effort to colonize as much as possible in the local area. It again went with the theme of the Republic refusing to allocate resources to planets in need. If colonizers could simply overpower weaker and underdeveloped systems without repercussions, then they would simply continue to expand. The Huck had done their work to several planets to simply build up commerce. They had since set their sights on Kalee, where a species of reptilian-like people lived. The Kaleesh, like their neighbors, were technologically inferior to the Huck and were attacked. With war being waged on their home world, which highlighted a fight for survival, one of their youngest and most effective warriors came to understand the cost of this conflict. The Huck weren't going to leave, and they were going to enslave every single last Kaleesh person if it was the last thing their empire did. The warrior known by the name of Qymaen Sheelal, i.e. Grievous, served with brothers and sisters on the front line of conflict. He developed skills as a combatant, and through watching, experiencing, and learning, grew as a leader. At this crucial juncture in the war in the year 34 BBY, Qymaen recognized the importance for galactic assistance. His people had reached out to the Republic before, asking for their help. The tragedy is that they didn't even ask for the Republic to attack the Huck. They simply wanted to be left alone. There were galactic regulations that the Republic apparently upheld, protecting sovereign systems from oppression. Did they actually ever uphold it? No one on Kalee knew, so they reached out. When that didn't work, their sights turned towards the Jedi, and no, that did not work either. This was partially the ignorance of both the government and the Order. They were more likely to side with the technologically advanced society because the Huck could more effectively muddle the truth, which is what they did. In an effort to protect their colonization, they explained that they were simply trying to retain hostages held by these numerous planets, the ones they colonized. With the people of Kalee in particular, the sentiment the Huck gave to the Republic was that nearly 3,000 hostages had been apprehended by Kaleesh warriors, savages if you will. If they didn't want to be attacked, then they should simply just give up their hostages. Was this true? Not in the slightest. The Kalee didn't have strong communication outputs, so they couldn't really dispute this. Didn't help that the Huck could also jam transmissions to the galactic capital. That brought everything back to Qymaen Sheelal. As a young veteran of what had been his lifelong conflict, he still had some youthful optimism. This isn't to say that Qymaen believed in the Republic or what their galactic system offered. He simply believed that there was hope for his people. The war that he had participated in to protect his home world from the oppressive bug species hadn't destroyed his sense of hope yet. He had absolutely lost comrades, friends, and family members, but it hadn't gotten to the extent that he believed nothing would change it. So Qymaen, with a band of other Kaleesh representatives, took advantage of a lull in the war and traveled to the planet of Molinist, so they could use world-class starliners to travel to Coruscant. That also didn't help his people's case either. Without proper technology, they were struggling to even get messages off-world. They were truly behind in the tech race, and the Huck took advantage of it. The worst part is, the Yamri would have struggled in an open engagement with 4 of the largest criminal organizations, but they were on an opposite side of the galaxy. It was a quote-unquote Yamri empire that looked strong because of its opponent's lack of protection. One could even argue that the Zygerians could conquer them, and that, in all honesty, is quite pathetic for a wannabe empire. Regardless, the technologically inferior Kaleesh made their way from the top of the galactic map to the core, where they would be immersed in true society. For people from a poor northern outer rim world, seeing the capital was like taking your first hit of spice. It sent ripples of shock through their systems as they tried to even grasp how their entire worldview had changed. They knew to an extent that the wretched Huck had blocked their communication attempts, but how is it that a society so advanced couldn't stop the Huck from doing that? Unfortunately, despite how remarkable Coruscant seemed to these people, they also recognized how little they had, and how little the people of the Republic wanted to share it with outsiders. As they slowly but surely made their way across this uncharted territory towards the Executive Plaza, Qymaen started considering alternative options. In no way would his people receive the freedom they deserved without firstly joining the Republic. They needed to be represented, and unfortunately, no one with him had the capacity to communicate that effectively. Sheelal barely had the wit in his own mind to hang with people in this massive city. But he was only considering the everyday citizens, not the illustrious members of the Galactic Senate. When they did arrive, they were brought before a small panel of senators. None of them were known to the people of Kalee, but they presented all of their evidence. Qymaen, throughout this entire discussion, continued to think about his options here. All of them feared the Republic rejecting their pleas for help and sending them back to Kalee without assistance. But this panel of senators had many great concerns regarding the Kaleesh, chief among them this apparent hostage situation. The Republic did not negotiate with terrorists or insurgents. It was against their nature, and so the Kaleesh representation had to continue trying to prove that they hadn't abducted a soul. They didn't do anything wrong, and it was outrageous that they were being called into question for something that not even the Republic could back up with evidence. These senators simply read reports from the Huck regarding the insurgency of the Kaleesh and took it at face value. The truth is, neither the Yamri or Kaleesh provided anything to back up either of their points. So, not to defend the overly powerful galactic government, but they didn't have any reason to support Kalee or the Huck. Unfortunately, that also meant that the government cared so little about a potential hostage crisis or colonization attempt that they didn't even bother sending investigators to clear the air. Luckily for Qymaen and his allies, they brought century-old hologram technology to show off the change to their world. It started with the beginning, how they had done nothing but tend to their crops and hope for a chance to be considered a part of the Republic, before showing the arrival of the first Huck attack ships. The senators, some of them barely keeping their eyes opened, listened and watched for hours as Qymaen Jai Sheelal did everything he could to protect his people from this outrageous and unfair attack on their sovereignty. The idea that the previously highly regarded Yamri could be so aggressive was preposterous. One of the senators, a Rhodian woman, described the Kaleesh as propagandists. They were stoking the flames of war and by doing so exasperating a situation more than it needed to be. Their reluctance to back down had costed themselves. It was no one's burden but their own. Another man, this one from a system nearby Ithor, agreed. The Kaleesh may have had the proof, but it didn't matter. As long as the senators believed one thing, and if said thing didn't require their inclusion, then they would not put the Republic into a position to participate. Qymaen was heartbroken, as representative after representative ended their discussion with a stand against the Kaleesh aggression against the Yamri. As the various members of the panel left the room, one remained behind. Qymaen, at this point, had enough of the bickering and was about to choke her to death with his bare hands until she spoke. Senator Lucinus expressed her deepest condolences. The representative from Hosnian Prime, one of the other ecumenopolises in the galaxy outside of Coruscant, believed that the Kaleesh had a case to make for themselves. She refused to believe the hostage BS from the Huck, and she told each of them, especially Qymaen, that she would make the decision to aid them on their quest. It was uncommon for someone of the deep core to show such sympathies. As it turned out, Aliet Lucinus was the singular core representative on the Huck War panel. No one else from the core came to listen, because it was considered an external case. Aliet believed in what the Republic was, much more than many of her colleagues did. She promised Qymaen and his peers that they would fight this. She had been convinced by their argument. Before they even started a private discussion, she sent out personnel from Hosnian Prime to investigate the war between the Yamri and the Kaleesh. It's not that she didn't believe Qymaen, but she needed to have all of her facts straight before humoring the idea of backing a system like this. And the truth is, Aliet knew that there was only one real path into protecting the planet of Kalee. It was simple, yet difficult: joining the Republic. See, as Senator Lucinus described it to the Kaleesh, the less they understood. But it went like this inside Republic politics. If a given world underwent a siege and didn't stand within the actual government's protection, the Republic would protect the more equipped foe. As Aliet said, this wasn't the first time she'd been a part of discussions like this. Basically though, if the Kaleesh could join the Republic, then the Yamri would no longer be permitted to attack them. And there was a benefit: location. Kalee was in the upper quadrant of the Outer Rim, right next to an important finance world like Molinist. There were two very realistic scenarios. The Kaleesh joined the Republic for their protection, oversight, and welcoming into their actual government with representation. Or they would have to use Molinist as a buffer to gather Republic attention. Both required just a little bit of push and pull. Joining the Republic was both easy and difficult. I know, sounds weird. Any system could technically join. They just needed to have the want to be in it. Now, Aliet explained these processes typically take years to complete, but most of the processing information went through Hosnian Prime, and then back to Coruscant. She might be able to expedite it, since it technically could take a lot of bureaucracy to complete. On the off chance that didn't pan out for them, then she could theoretically make a movement inside the Senate to request sector forces to Molinist, due to a potential threat coming from Yamri's expansion. But with that came a lot of hollow promises. She could promise a Republic presence, but not an actual difference maker. In the end though, Aliet was putting her best foot forward, and Qymaen was willing to take anything he could get. If it wasn't Republic protection, then he would settle for unity. Because the truth is, despite their desire for help, the Kaleesh didn't necessarily want to join the Republic either. They'd been let down by the galactic government. They were simply trying their best to get through this war alive. Senator Lucinus provided them with valuable options, but Qymaen wouldn't avoid enslavement from the Huck, only to be enslaved by the Republic. But that was the beauty of the galactic government. There was no required planetary system to follow. For example, Naboo had a monarchy of sorts. Many other systems had various forms of streptocracy, democracy, republics, parliaments, and syndicism. Point being, if Kalee joined the Republic, they wouldn't suddenly lose their ability to self-govern. The Republic just required that the planetary representatives follow the galactic system inside the Senate. And despite his talents for war and consistency of victory in combat, his peers voted for Qymaen Sheelal to represent their people in the chance that Kalee gets to join the Galactic Republic. Within the next 72 hours, Senator Lucinus had all the information she needed to make a strong case for Kalee. Her scouts from Hosnian reported on the massive pushes made by the Yamri. It wasn't only an invasion, but what she would call unprovoked genocide. Aliet's Jedi contacts also gave her details reported by Jedi Masters who tried to intervene in the conflict, though their findings had been skewed. As it turned out, the Huck knew how to portray themselves in a vulnerable light when they found out that representatives from the Republic would be visiting. With Senator Lucinus's scouts from Hosnian, the scouts viewed a battle started by the Huck without any type of provocation from a minor coastal town belonging to the Kaleesh, one where there were quote-unquote no hostages. Elliot and Qymaen spoke extensively about the terms of acceptance from the Republic. Thanks to her sway on Hosnian, she was able to push Kalee to the forefront of systems under the potential inclusion list. Chancellor Valorum, despite being from Coruscant, had a keen interest in building the economy through various sources of strength. Elliot believed that Finis had plans to start integrating new tax codes on trade lanes and hyperspace routes. It doesn't really sound important in regard to the addition of Kalee into the Republic, but it actually meant everything. Being so close to Molinus could produce interest in businesses from core-based investors, though this does mean that problems could arise for the inexperienced representative to be Qymaen Jai Sheelal. Following their update conversation, Qymaen sat in on a session that would decide Kalee's fate. Luckily for the Kaleesh, the Republic was accepting a batch of 4 new systems, and Kalee fit an intriguing requirement. All 3 of the other systems allowed into the Republic within the cycle were in different corners of the galaxy. Kalee produced a very favorable location due to its placement near Molinist and Megiddo. There would be ceremonial swearing-ins for each of the representatives to come from the 4 new systems, but until then, since Qymaen was actually on Coruscant, he would have the joy of his life. Aliet and he would have immediate visitors from various senators interested in Kalee. Some of them were people that rejected the very panel that started all of this. These were senators looking for Kalee to join them on specific votes. It could range from any number of topics like Tabana gas procurement deals, expansion region tax codes, trade federation loans, sector authority augmentation, or even approvals for the banking clans. All of it seemed very unimportant to someone whose people were being murdered every day. Yet it should be said that Qymaen was not prepared for the credits that were waved in front of his face. The investors that crept along the corridors of the Executive Plaza were all sharks. They wanted to make credits, and they had no problem waving money around for small representatives. Someone like Qymaen could approve the construction of a space station over Kalee and receive very little planetary growth, just the satisfaction of having extra credits in his bank account. Now, Grievous had no interest in becoming a millionaire or something greater, like dozens of other veteran senators. He didn't really even know what that was. He wanted these credits because they were instant solutions. Maybe the galaxy wasn't divided by war, or even seen major conflict in over a millennium, but there were still war dogs. These people didn't bother hanging around Coruscant, but they existed, and they had weapons. If the Republic wouldn't involve themselves with Kalee, as he suspected they wouldn't, aside from accepting them into the actual government, then Qymaen had an alternative solution. Of course, Qymaen wouldn't go straight in and start taking bribes, but until he could gather support for his planet, he collected offers and stashed them away in his satchel, all of these coming from super PACs, billionaires, and investors. Grievous returned to his homeworld 3 times within the next month. It was very challenging for him. He had to continuously promise his people protection from the Republic, when it continued to not come. Those who sent him to Coruscant started to believe that he had been corrupted, and it crushed his soul. On one side, Qymaen was fighting for his people inside the Senate, facing bureaucracy for the first time ever, and on the other hand, he had all the pressure from his people building, because the genocide was only getting worse. Inside the Senate, his people, their lives, and the known genocide was reduced to a committee discussion, or just votes held aside because of some other minor incident elsewhere. Qymaen was a warrior at heart, but even he knew that he couldn't just start killing off senators inside the Executive Plaza. He felt hopeless, and as the month drew closer to a conclusion, he started to turn back towards the offers he collected on day 1 and throughout the last month. He didn't realize it, but by holding out or choosing to focus on bureaucracy solving his problems at home, he created bigger offers for himself. These investors believed he was playing hardball and provided newer and better choices to support them or to build on Kalee. Yet the main reason he came off as complacent to his people came from the false promises. He had the very honor of talking to Finis Valorum, who honestly expressed his interest in providing relief to Kalee. But therein lay the problem. Despite joining the Republic, the Huk fell back away from showing itself off as a colonizing genocidal system. The reports from Senator Lucinus's scouts of Hosnian Prime were accurate, but they were also accurate to a pre-Republic Kalee. So while the government openly accepted it, they also couldn't do anything because Republic scouts couldn't find proof of Yamri invasions following Kalee's integration into the Republic. The Huk were highly invested in the Senate and its movements because they intentionally built their miniature empire around Republic territory. It's why Kalee was the perfect planet to invade prior to their integration. They provided extra territory and resources to continue building their own miniature regime. Now though, following the integration, the Yamri hid guerrillas across Kalee, while withdrawing their larger forces. So the genocide persisted, while the Republic unwillingly missed everything that Qymaen was constantly preaching. He was able to deliver numbers for the Senate, but it didn't mean that there was enough proof to convince the Republic to actually intervene. The promises of Senator Elliott continued, but even she couldn't do anything. It's why the Yamri guerrillas were so effective. Not a soul could see the invasion, and even though it transformed from a frontal assault to slaughters in the cover of darkness, no one could see the proof. The Republic sent relief packages to Kalee for all they suffered through prior to integration, which was appreciated genuinely, but it was not enough. Their warriors weren't able to stop the guerrillas, and as the Huk wanted, the Kaleesh were unable to declare war or fight with the Yamri because it could ruin their relationship with the Republic. Suddenly, a favorable situation became even more unfavorable. Valorum called the situation unfortunate, but that again didn't make anyone's lives better. It just deepened the resentment Grievous had for the Republic and the Jedi. Neither were very effective, and at the end of the rope, with his population on the verge of imploding, Qymaen turned towards the investors. Qymaen sat down with who he could and accepted their deals. The first one required that Kalee give full access to the mountains of their planet for mining. Another demanded a full-blown spaceport for industrial construction in the middle of one of their fields. It was a pact from Kuat and Corellia that was called the Shipbuilding Coalition. They were going to start investing in a small world to build up vessels that might be purchased on worlds near Molinist. It was a transportation thing. Long story short, buyers would much rather have their vessels within days rather than weeks, due to shipping from the core to northern outer rim. Also, it was cheaper for the company. Lastly, and worst of all for the Qymaen, was the investors from the Trade Federation. They were involved because they wanted to extend their monopolization into banking clan territory, again because Molinist was so close. The intentions of the Federation beyond competing with the banking clans weren't known to Grievous, so he accepted all three deals, received direct assistance from the Trade Federation, and the credits personally he needed to buy protection for his planet without actively joining a war. As a member within the Republic, Qymaen did not buy weapons of mass destruction. Instead, his targets for purchase became defense towers, shield generators, and sentry droids. However, the deal he made with the Federation provided his people with everything he needed. The credits rolled into his account on Coruscant, and Senator Sheelal returned to his home world to keep an eye on the conflict that was supposed to end. Of course, all deals on Coruscant don't immediately translate into what the specified contract laid out. While the Federation offered the best deal out of all three, it also had something that no other investor had: weapons. Captain Martuk of the Federation deployed a fleet over the Yamri homeworld and started an invasion of his own. Within hours, hundreds of thousands of Huk soldiers were slaughtered. Thousands more were injured, as buildings were knocked over and people were captured. The Trade Federation over-delivered on their promise by taking more territory and slaves for themselves. Now, the Republic couldn't legally do anything to the Kaleesh for this because even if they requested this very action, they still didn't commit it. This led to several problems with Valorum though, most of which validating his desire to create tax codes designed to impact the Federation and their influence. Qymaen was pretty much last to learn about this invasion. Martuk approached him with a sentence or two, confirming the end of all of their problems. But then he reminded Qymaen that his people would become fine additions to the Federation's great empire. At this, and what Grievous would see in the following several months, would be the rapid industrialization of his home world. On Coruscant, away from Kalee, he would bicker with senators and try to maintain his relationships with individuals like Aliette that supported him initially, but also the backlash he received from senators because of the deals he accepted. See, when Qymaen approached the Senate, he was desperate. Now he was swimming in credits that he didn't even know what to do with. He spent all of his time bouncing between Senate sessions and trying to create deals to benefit his planet and systems like it. But the people who supported up-and-coming worlds like Kalee also stood against powerful corporations like the Federation or Shipbuilding Coalition. Their corporate habits carried a lot of corrupt weight that senators worried about planetary development didn't like. It created immediate tension between Qymaen and Aliette. She and others typically saw behavior like this and associated it with unawareness because it's what it was, but still, someone like Aliette felt a little betrayed. She hoped to assist Kalee with proper development, integration of trade, and not complete industrialization. Systems that followed the industrial route like Kalee was doing now, typically in the future, politically vied for less societally progressive deals that favored corporations. Aliette didn't want that for Kalee, and she knew better than to want something for another planet because it wasn't hers. While Kalee wasn't a #1 planet in anyone's minds, its direct involvement in galactic politics had some minor ramifications that eventually became major. Putting the Trade Federation so close to banking clan territory created tension that forced Valorum's hand. Because the Federation militaristically wiped out the Huck, the banking clans got reasonably worried. Having such a vicious power in the galaxy that not even the combined sector authority forces could stand up to became quite problematic when the banking clans complained. The clans had a lot of influence over the Republic. They held control over the credit line used by the government. They typically could forgive movements made by the Federation, but since it was just literally a system over, especially with the rapid industrialization of Kalee, they couldn't just ignore it this time. Not only did the Federation bother the clans, but the system of Kalee. These concerns were brought before the Chancellor, the Intergalactic Coalition Committee, ICC, and then the Senate itself. The ICC was a panel within the Senate that oversaw all megacorporations that operated within Republic jurisdiction, and they viewed the hostile actions of the Federation on behalf of the Kaleesh as an act of war. With months before the planned blockade over Naboo, Chancellor Valorum produced a new legislation that would see the dissolution of the Trade Federation and harsher taxes on trade routes. It would break the entire company up and spread its resources to various corporations and the Republic itself. The legislation stated that the company had become too powerful as a monopoly to be allowed to continue legal operation. While this legislation had a lot of weight, thanks to the banking clans backing it, the Trade Federation had Senator Palpatine from Naboo, who immediately, despite his populist views, defended the corporation and used his contacts to keep it from dissolution inside the Senate. This brought the Naboo senator to the new Kaleesh senator, Qymaen Sheelal. To say that Grievous disliked Sheev Palpatine off the bat would be an understatement. He hated the senator. Palpatine's sly and methodical speaking habits, tied together with his desire to convince Qymaen to trust a Federation, did it. Since the end of the Huck conflict and the total destruction of their minor empire, Qymaen started to see the Federation as savages. They were imperialistic demagogues trying to seize control over the galaxy with corporate wealth. It also didn't really help their case that they were pretty much doing the most legal version of slavery on his planet. That, tied together with the rapid industrialization of what was once green fields that once coated the planet, left the wartime Qymaen distraught. Fighting the Huck was an uphill battle before Republic integration. Trying to even conceptualize fighting back against the Federation was a nightmare. This was the only place he could actually do it. Grievous could humor the idea of the other coalitions getting involved with the industrialization, because it offered a product for his people to sell. The Federation abused his people, and they all needed to pay the Federation for their sins, basically. Only problem for Qymaen, though, was the deal he made. Part of the contract with the Federation said that he couldn't vote against their interests for a whole 3 years. It's most of the reason that Senator Aliette started to dislike Qymaen. But if they were dissolved, then he would be free from their oversight and their threats. Palpatine offered alternative methods, such as access to committees that could favor Kalee, But Qymaen understood, after his first few months inside the Senate, that politicians could not be trusted. They only wanted what was best for themselves, and sometimes their planets. But Palpatine was a key example of this, and despite being so close to Valorum on the stage, he did not share the same thoughts on the Federation as the Chancellor. As the voting process to dissolve the Federation persisted, the votes needed to continue it fluctuated. At certain points it looked like the Republic would go through with it, but then it would switch back to getting a little afraid of the Federation. Eventually it even got to a point where Qymaen's vote mattered, and Palpatine knew he could force his hand against the Kalee senator. During a recorded session with his political advisors from Hosnian Prime, people in Aliet's camp that actually still believed in Qymaen, Palpatine busted in. The senator from Naboo sat down across the table and expressed disdain for Qymaen's continuous support for the Federation's dissolution. Palpatine thoroughly explained how he would make the tragedy of Yamri look like a starter course. He knew the Federation well, and they could very easily wipe Kalee off the galactic map, an entire system forgotten by the history books of time. If Grievous had any sense at all, he'd back down and forget everything he ever tried against the Federation. They would be forgiving if he simply changed his vote. Qymaen, the warrior, the hero of his people, sat silently for a moment. He eyed the Naboo senator and told him that he could dismember him, turn him into a cyborg, and torture him, and he would still not change his vote. Qymaen breathed heavily for a moment, imagining the torture he would put himself through for his people. Then, knowing that pain, the pain he had caused them because he didn't understand the politics of Coruscant, he wished Palpatine a good day, telling him that it's unfortunate that a soul from such a beautiful world had no sense of compassion for a very clearly wounded galaxy. Sheev looked at Qymaen and shoved himself out of the chair and out the door. Sidious typically wouldn't be so bold with his threats, but he needed Qymaen to understand how fortunate his world had been. The Federation was being held back, which directly interfered with Palpatine's Sith plans for Naboo, and that was a huge problem for the Sith. Thanks to the recorded audio discussion of Palpatine, the tabloids shredded the Senate. The hubris to allow the Federation to have such influence over the Republic pissed people off. The Senate wasn't just exposed, but the shady deals of the corporate sector were too. In response, dozens of representatives flipped their stances and took a stand against the Federation to more accurately represent their home planets, leading to the company's eventual dissolution. Most of the actual process dealt with financial blackmail with the banking clans that held control over the Federation's investments. It was a pain, but it also led directly to Palpatine's arrest. The Jedi were brought in by Valorum to oversee the arrest of various other senators that backed the Federation. It would take years to undo, but that paled in comparison to what Qymaen had to clean up on his own home world. He couldn't crack the shipbuilding coalition, and thus, even without the Federation, Kalee became a hyper-focused industrialized system. But due to all the chaos surrounding the Federation, Qymaen made a motion that his system needed for morale. Just as the Hawk used guerrilla warfare against them after their integration into the government, Kaleesh warriors led by their fierce senator invaded Yamri territory and slowly conquered it, adding it to their slowly growing society. The promise, again made by Grievous, was that the shipbuilding coalition could use more territory and space on Yamri planets so they wouldn't damage Kalee's atmosphere or environment. This also did go for the mining part too. Following Grievous's term as senator, the Kaleesh would elect more representatives that would follow Qymaen's example, though their effect on the galaxy would shrink drastically from Grievous's tenure as representative. However, one case, aside from the rapid anti-megacorporation stance made by the Republic, would be that of the Sith. They were not destroyed. Palpatine faced a jail sentence and was dealt with eventually, when Plagueis abandoned him. Maul and Plagueis the Wise became the master and apprentice duo of the Sith. Though without the political prowess of Palpatine, and issues with Dooku, they returned to a more shadow state. The clone plan fell through, especially without Palpatine pushing Dooku, who ended up betraying the Sith and dying in the process. In the years that followed, the Sith became more so observers in the galaxy, trying to repeat what they almost accomplished with Palpatine, but continued to fail at. And as for Grievous, his political scandals followed him throughout his life, but his legacy for Kalee was world-defining. they and the decades that followed his tenure became a utopia for ship craftsmanship in the North Outer Rim. Their warrior history would be recorded and remembered, but unlike Death Watch from Mandalore, it would not define them. It was honored and used to push them into the next stage of their civilization's growth. And that, my friends, is our political story. And special thanks to all the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash the like button. Let's talk about the story real quick. Yeah, still sick. That's why I sound ghastly. I don't know, but it's a thing. We're chill. We're doing it. We're doing it, guys. So, anyways, story time. So I really like with these senator stories. You know, we've done them with Anakin, and I think a couple other ones. You know the ones. Brain no work right now. You know the ones, but the other senator stories. I wanted Grievous to be almost incapable, as coming off as not stupid, but not understanding. And I think that's the only way you can really take him in this story. I know the thumbnail has Grievous, but I mean this is pre-injury Grievous. This is not him as a cyborg. This is just it's Qymaen Jai Sheelal. You know, that's who he is. But I really wanted this character to feel just like he was swimming, like he couldn't, like he was drowning almost. He's just in a sea of something he doesn't understand. This is a warrior, a leader, but his people chose him because he was a leader, not because he was great at politics. They were just like, hey, you've led us into battle one time. You should do this. And he's like, okay. And what ends up happening is he gets in line with, you know, the bad guys. He's letting them kind of walk all over him because he's desperate. And that, I feel, is very accurate of how the Federation would use its power over vulnerable systems like Kalee, is to expose their vulnerabilities and say, oh, you can't do it without us, and then they sweep in. And there are several cases where the Federation uses basically slavery without it actually being real slavery. Think like prison labor, kind of like that. And they use it to exploit systems, and it felt like that'd be the natural thing that they would do to Kalee, not just Kalee, but to the Yamri as well. And so it's kind of unironically a tragedy for both systems, because if it weren't for the anti-Federation rhetoric that came out of the banking clans, I think that the Yamri and the Kaleesh would have actually ended up in a very similar position, where they would have been slaves in their own homes. And I kind of loved that the banking clan gets to be the hero in the story. They're still technically in the wrong, because they are, you know, using their influence to get what they want. But it's also kind of ironic that their direct request for the Federation to kind of back off without confronting the Federation, but with the Republic, is the way that the government almost becomes less corporate friendly, but in that same situation, it does still favor the banking clans. And as for the story, I didn't want to kill the Sith off. They're not really the most important part of the story. This is the story of Kalee and Qymaen Jai Sheelal, but I also kind of like the idea that Palpatine was kind of the key to kind of push it forward. I'm not saying that Plagueis isn't capable, but Palpatine was the perfect ingredient. Like, he was the perfect addition to the Sith plan. And I think Plagueis' focus on Sith alchemy would kind of distract him rather than trying to finish the Sith plan. So I hope you all enjoy the story of Grievous becoming a senator. Weird combination. But I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.